All right, so welcome to Brian and Lynn, who are joining us today. Sarah, if you're not familiar with Sarah, she's the Director of Community Development for Tillamook County. And we have Lynn Saxton here, who's a subcommittee member, and Guy Sievert, a subcommittee member, and Lori, a subcommittee member. And myself, Randall Cook, I guess it just says NCAC host. I'm your host today. All right. Uh,
No,
the
Tom?
no Tom so far. I know he had some plans for one of the meetings. He might not make it, and Mark Everett said he'll be late, so
Okay.
Mark will join us in a little while. First of all, I'd like to ask for approval of today's agenda from the committee members.
So moved.
So asked.
Okay, and myself, so that was approved. And review and approval of the minutes of the March 10th meeting of the subcommittee. Any additions or corrections? Hearing nothing about any corrections or additions, please indicate your approval of the minutes.
Approved.
Guy? You're checking them?
No, I'm checking the agenda, but go ahead. Yeah, approve the minutes.
Okay, all right. Minutes are approved. Any conflict of interest in today's activities for any of the committee members?
No.
Okay, nor do I. Okay. So we are going to today review the reworked, well, Tom's got the slides though, doesn't he? Oh, Sarah's got them. All right, the handoff has happened. And we need sound on you, Sarah.
Can you hear me now?
Now I can hear you.
Is it too loud or too quiet?
Could use a little volume now.
Little
We've
more
turned it
volume.
down.
Okay. How about now?
That's great.
Perfect.
Is that good? Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes. And then Ran, are we going to talk about the April 5th date later before the end of the meeting too? Or do you want to do that now in case Tom comes? We can wait.
Yeah, well, let's discuss it now just because if we're waiting for Mark and Tom, I think we can sort it out. Mostly it was whether you had conflicts that day because there's meetings in Oceanside and Nesquin at the same time on April 5th.
Right.
I didn't know if you were presenting at both.
Mhm. So I had the 29th and the 5th both on my calendar initially for Nescoin.
Yes,
Okay.
you're
Uh,
you're presenting the 29th, so that your presentation is not in conflict. It's the public meeting where if we ran into something we couldn't answer, that would be handy to have you there.
right. So I have let's see, how do I say this? I would say at this moment in time, Oceanside is struggling with a few things pretty badly that are creating a pretty unhealthy community situation. I have 2 evening meetings this week in Oceanside. And so what I'm wondering is if I make the presentation on the 29th, are you guys comfortable carrying the ball with updates on the 5th?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
I would
I
say
think
we
that's
are.
basically our job is to manage and the dialogue with the public and find out when we make the president, hopefully they have attended the 29th and got more background than just overview or something, so they can have intelligent questions. But I think we're prepared to respond to them. And it's not like that's the end of the world, but we would like to get some votes on some things from them.
Yeah. And I'm I'll help you put that list together and we'll make sure that those things are part of my presentation on the 29th. So that when you ask for those votes, because even just me talking about them on the 29th will help you with dialogue if there are some questions. I appreciate that. I just, I need to help them work through a couple of things in the next couple of weeks.
And I think, Sarah, since the 5th is not the official public meeting tied to the hearing, people will get another bite at the apple if they need it. So
Right.
I think, given that structure, I think we'll be fine. And I'll be in Nescoin in person. I mean, I'll be there for the meeting at the golf course, you know, so.
The only other thing I was gonna ask is if you wanted to put it later in the day, I am happy to leave Oceanside and drive straight to Nescoin. Yeah, okay. I'm
Well,
sorry.
the other thing this clarifies is that I think I will get the equipment required to do the meeting as a Zoom because you won't be there. And so, and the NCA already funded that, but the NCAC said they didn't want it because they didn't know where they would leave it. And so I think it's going to end up being in my possession as something that the community association has so that they can do Zoom meetings also, but the NCAC can use it whenever they want. So I will purchase that equipment in the next week.
But Rand, can I ask, the 29th and the 5th, on the 29th, Sarah, it's only Sarah presenting a broad brush middle housing thing, or is she gonna be presenting Nescoin's middle housing, where we are at this point with our
Second.
recommendations?
The latter.
Mhm.
So everybody's gonna have what Nescoin is saying about this. We don't have to spend a lot of time going into why, blah, whatever. Just that this is Nescoin's response to state legislation that says we've got to revise this to include middle house, our housing codes to include middle housing. So then, and on the 5th, and the meeting on the 29th is all Zoom, right?
Yes,
And then the meeting on the 5th, we're gonna do at the clubhouse,
yes.
potential Zoom for people. And that will be hosted by us to get a response back. So when people are left on 29th, they will be told, if you got questions, you got thoughts, you got other ideas, bring them on the 5th.
Well, I'd encourage them
We don't want Sarah to have to be in, like you said, Rand, it's our job to get the feedback from the community and whatever, and process it and defend it or not. And then go back and work on it again, the language, and we work with Sarah and the county in general about what the new language, but we don't want to put Sarah, it seems, in the place of defending what our committee is doing
right.
on the 29th.
Well, I think I'd like to put Sarah, no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I know.
Well, for a good time, Sarah. Just kidding, but I also think that I think there's going to be like two bounces here. There's going to be a bounce on the 5th when people have heard what it is and they've thought about it, and then they develop more questions. And I think we really need to encourage people to come on the 5th with their questions. This is what doctors ask you to do these days so that you organize your mind before you get in their office. Ask people to write their questions down from the 29th meeting on paper and bring them to the meeting, and we'll do our very best to answer them. And what we don't know, we won't respond to. The second bounce will be when the public notice goes out. And I actually think that is where the big bounce will occur, because the people who've been following this process are going to understand this, and they're going to be a little better informed than when the public notice goes out tied to the public hearing. And that is when I would anticipate the most reaction.
Yeah, maybe.
I will have, so my goal also would be, so based on our conversations today, I am going to try by Saturday, And I'll probably send them to you guys Friday night. Let me look at my calendar to make sure I'm not overcommitting myself. Or I might have them for you Saturday. But you will see the first draft of the Nesco and zoning codes revised.
Oh.
And
that'd
the
be
map.
helpful.
And the map, and I can give you, like, there's some things that, like, intentionally, the dialogue you guys have with folks on the 5th will be really important. One of them will be, how do we feel about the 70% lot coverage that currently exists? Done a lot of work on lot coverage versus floor area ratio in the last couple of weeks. I really like what Nesco already has in place the best. But I think as we've had that conversation, the other thing for the community dialogue is, should, design standards, we can require them for 3 units, 4 units, cottage clusters, and townhomes. Does the community feel those should also apply to 1 and 2 family dwellings? Right? Or should we even require any design standards at all? So these are the things that, I will walk everybody into the conversation on the 29th and say, when you come on the 5th, these are the things that the committee needs your feedback on. So I will help you put that list together and prepare them. But those are going to be the big things. And then the cottage cluster standards. We had a long conversation about community buildings, right? So I will help you itemize that list of things that we need feedback on, so that I can go from the first draft to this feedback to the second draft. If that makes sense to everybody, because I'm not pulling it together, but it's these nuances now that, I'll put them on paper, put draft on there as big as I can. And Lynn, to your point, about notices, when people start seeing things on paper, which is happening elsewhere, that fire gets lit anyway. So that's what's going to happen. That's why I want to get you at least a draft. The first draft, this will be the first of many drafts, but the first draft to you all sometime on or before the 29th is, so then we have that for the 5th. And then what feedback you guys get, we come back and we talk about it, and then I can start updating that work on paper.
Okay.
Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, no, that's what we needed to sort out
Thank you for
today.
my absence on the 5th.
Well, I think you're covering a lot of bases. And there's the March and Tillamook, and I kind of wondered if it should just move. But, c'est la vie. I think we can handle this, and it'll be fine. Okay. All right. So
if I can get down there next weekend sometime, could I meet someone to drop those maps and stuff off with? Is there someone that I could reach out to say, hey, okay, I'll email you, Randall, and and then we'll see about meeting. So I can give you as much for that 5th meeting beforehand. I'm happy to drive to Nesco.
Okay.
It's something going to be ready. I'm coming through Tillamook on Tuesday.
Oh, you are coming to Tillamook on Tuesday?
Yeah, driving through Tillamook on Tuesday, yeah.
Oh, that might actually that gives me a couple of extra days. Yeah, I'll email both.
Wait, this tomorrow.
Huh?
I was talking about tomorrow, never mind. So that's not gonna be right, no, never mind.
My goal today.
Get on it, Sarah.
Up there and breathing by 8 p.m. tonight.
Yeah. Okay, well, let me know, and I'll be here, or we'll figure out something to get a hold of those materials.
Perfect.
And it's much easier for us to run up and grab them
than it is for you to take the time.
And I actually have a reason.
Although you like to go to the Hawk and have something sometimes.
I do. Yeah, I might work that out. Yeah, thank you. I'll let you know.
Okay. All right.
I like my time in Nesco too.
All right. So, do you have the things to share with us.
I do.
Slide
Yeah, okay.
deck.
Yes, I do. And yes, I'm gonna share, let's see, actually, let me go back. Because I want to do the one that I can write on for Tom and save. I have it, but I saved it as a PDF for me. Sorry, it's loading.
Oh, Lynn, those can't be Oregon strawberries, can they?
That
Oh,
I'm eating?
I thought you had a strawberry there.
I was eating apple. I'm eating an apple.
Apple, okay, it was a slice of an apple.
We just planted our strawberries. It'll be a few weeks.
Yeah, I know, no, I thought it was like 2 months away.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Oh, I think it's sharing my wrong screen.
There you go.
Got it. Oh,
What was it? Was that the right one or was that?
Cottage cluster discussion.
Yep. Oh, I did show the right one. Okay. Okay. So you guys can see the cottage cluster discussion?
Yes.
Okay. So as Tom had said, the version shows the results of changes, comments, and directives from the subcommittee's review. Materials from the slides that we have not discussed were integrated and are the color green. So for all of us that cannot quickly identify things differentiated by color, I will point those out. All right, so the basic configuration of cottage cluster design. So based on our previous conversations, what we landed on was a minimum of 4 and up to 8 outright. And located on a single platted lot, we are at 900 square feet. And what it is I believe it's the footprint. So that was something that we had talked about. It's not living space, it's the footprint of the cottage.
Right.
With that, there is an additional allowance of 200 square feet for an attached garage. 10-foot minimum distance between buildings. We remember what the setback perimeters were, also 10 feet, and the proposal is for single story, which limits cottages to 17 feet in height.
So Sarah,
Mhm.
we may have already talked about this, but does that mean each cottage unit can have 200 square feet for a garage?
Yes.
Okay.
So that's one of the things. So yes, so does the committee still feel like we want to give an allowance for a garage / storage area for each cottage?
Well, the implications are that it will shrink. Well, you would need greater area with setbacks and everything to make that fit. So
Correct.
that would be limited to however many you could fit on the lot. So I think it's
If I think
somewhat
about-
self-regulating. It doesn't have to be everyone. It can just be the ones that fit, given the equation of 900 square foot additional possibility of 200 square feet with the setbacks and the common areas and all those things included. So it'll be self-regulating as to whether that functions. Okay.
Exactly. Guy, did you have a comment on that?
Well, I was thinking that later, I mean, I'm thinking of the designs that we would looked at, and I was trying to remember, and I don't have it in front of me, I think we said about off-street parking and how parking was gonna be set
What's
up
the next,
on some
might
of
be
those
the next
designs.
slide, Guy.
Okay, I'll just wait. I mean, I'm trying to think of how that goes with this, every
Right.
unit being able to have a garage, but go ahead, I'll just wait.
Yeah, and I would say they don't have to have a garage. What we're saying is that if you want a garage.
Yeah.
Up to 200 square feet, and to Randall's point, the size of the lot is going to determine all of this.
Right, and.
Okay, so,
In the, not, yeah, like, here, take a look at this, and then,
so our parking obligations are 1 space per unit.
yeah,
So this was an example of, what this depicts as 8 units. Means that here is, I believe it's 1,200 square feet of courtyard, right? Because if we do 150 square feet per unit. And then, so you've got 8 units, 10-foot separation, you've got your common courtyard. And then you've got your parking actually over at the side.
right,
And you can see where there's one with a garage and a carport that comes off the street. I loved the conversations we had last time about connectivity with the community as a whole. There are some orientation. So Lori, I was thinking of you specifically in your comments. There's permissive language for orientation that any cottage within 20 feet of a property line abutting a public way for orientation to be street facing. So that, you don't have, you're not looking at the back end of a bunch of units. And so that's probably down in Tom's slides here a little bit, but that's certainly something that we can encourage.
now, I think that in this design here. Again, didn't we talk last time about that every unit facing the street has to have a porch front facing the street? But that, so this may, I think we agreed on that, I might be wrong, but that would mean this design would still need, that'd be good. The other thing I want to ask Sarah is there any prohibition from building kind of a sheltered parking off to the side?
No, you can do you can do covered parking. There are some setback provisions, so the parking, if they're covered, I think it's what it is now. There's also like requirements, and I think these are in here a little bit later, where we can talk about, you can't have clusters of parking. I believe it's more than 8 without some sort of landscaping feature or something to break them up. I got to go through Tom's slides again. I read them again last night, but I don't remember where that is in this.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so, and in terms of the porch, I'll speak to that too here in just a minute. And then, okay, let's see. So here's another one.
So this has the orientation of the porches to the common, but the common is open to the street. And so that was the way we dealt with the orientation to the street, that the courtyard is open to the street, and then that all the porches are inviting from the street.
Right.
Yeah, not necessarily, but I would, yeah, let's keep going.
Okay. Okay. So, I may have to do some work on this language right here. So parking areas shall have a side obscuring screen between lots, fenced vegetative buffer. I am working on that with the consultant right now to clarify some language there. And the ADA piece, I think we can encourage ADA parking. Through building codes, there are triggers that will do that based on the number of units anyway. But where we are definitely at is one off-street parking space. Those are 8 feet by 20 feet per unit. And then the lighting elements, so this is something that I'm working on as well. And one of the questions about the lighting is whether it will go in the NESCO and zoning districts or become part of a larger, broader application countywide.
At this hour, Newport, this city council just passed some lighting
Mhm.
standards. I
So
think it was,
that would be one of the questions on the 5th, is to ask the community how they feel about the lighting standards.
So one of the things that came up in the, this last community association meeting was the concept of lighting, lighting ends at your property line. So that the light that is lighting your property can only light your property, not the surrounding properties. So it's a way of stating a concept that limits lighting to your property, not, just a broadcast light.
Mhm.
well, there's some good language. I mean, it's, you want language that is really specific, and there's no confusion, and we've got some, good examples in Deschutes County and other places that
Okay,
have dealt
Good.
with this, so,
Mhm.
yeah.
okay.
Okay, so here's that parking language we were talking about. Off-street parking may be arranged in clusters, subject to the following standards. Cottage cluster, so this is all taken out of the model code. Cottage cluster projects with fewer than 16 cottages are permitted parking clusters of not more than 5 contiguous spaces. So what that means is you would have to have some landscaping design. If there were more than 5 spaces, you would have to have something help break that up so it doesn't look like a great big parking lot. What I am getting feedback on is when it says it must be, parking clusters must be separated from other spaces by at least 4 feet of landscaping. I don't know if that means 4 feet along the distance of the spaces in terms of depth or width.
What I've often seen is they'll put a little peninsula out with a sidewalk. So you get out of your car and get onto a sidewalk, but maybe there's a landscaping on either side of it. I've seen more and more of those in parking lots where they break it up with and I think would be 4 feet wide.
Yeah, because like if this was supposed to be a landscape area, so you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 break. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is it 4 feet this way? Is it 4
No,
feet this way?
I think it's the second
The
width.
or can it be discretionary? And the idea is you can make it whatever shape you want. It just has to be 4 feet.
Right, so
Right, so the developer can decide what that looks like.
The part of what I think is going to happen for the parking and the landscaping and the orientation of decks and entries is if it's construction in the village and the developer's worth their salt, they're going to pay a lot of attention to what's on the ground next door, because the village is a patchwork quilt of, I mean, none of these rules exist in the village. Doors are off to the side. There's a house in front of a house. There's a house behind. I mean, so I think that maximum effort needs to be made, and a good developer will do this, to kind of not just laying down something that's been in a book somewhere, but saying, okay, here's the core parameters that we need to meet, and here's the best way to do it. And I think that's going to be critical. In other areas, if you have enough acreage, you can drop down something that's already preset, and it may work. But the village is a real kind of hodgepodge of where placement occurs, and I think we really want developers to pay attention to that for the benefit of their asset value, and also for the attractiveness of the development to buyers or renters.
The downside of that, Lynn, is that there are some places in the village that you don't want to replicate in any way.
Right.
That were done, like you said, without rules. And yes, I think you don't want to build a place that kind of stands out from your next door neighbor, but some of these next door neighbors are interesting at best. Anyways, okay.
Okay, so.
What's the definition of not contiguous?
They don't abut,
Pardon?
they don't touch.
They don't touch, so a 1 foot separation is
4
not touching.
foot.
That's what you were talking about, 4 feet. It's gotta be a 4 foot.
I'm saying, I want to be clear that I understand how is it 4 square feet of area? Is it 4 feet across? Is it 1 foot by 4 feet? Like what is 4 feet?
Yeah. So we need
Okay.
to clarify that, but
I
that's
guess
whatever.
ask the consultants, but it makes more sense if it's 4 feet wide and then whatever separates the cars, so one doesn't see the other.
Right. Yes. Okay. So more on parking. So all of the parking, we are in agreement should be off-street. No on-street parking will help qualify the number of units. And so what this talks about is, parking space, vehicular maneuvering, you can't, so it cannot be located within 20 feet from any street property line except for an alley. Or between a property line and the front facade of cottages located closest to the street property line.
You wanna take the word of out of there, within of 20 feet,
Yes.
okay. I don't know if you could do that with your,
So this will interface as well with the standards that we already have for maneuverability of vehicles. Right, which already talks about, let's see if I can do this. If I bring this over real quick, can you guys see this? Just change the screen.
Yeah,
All right. So this is one of the things with Director Lady from Public Works. I am looking at. So in Article 4 of the ordinance, we already talk about off-street parking. Okay. So drainage would apply, buffering non-residential parking areas. Curbing, lighting, and proximity of traffic. So with that 20 feet, there's also this parking areas for 4 or more vehicles. So this would apply then to both fourplexes, townhomes, and cottage clusters. Shall be of sufficient size to allow the backing and maneuvering of vehicles entirely out of the flow of traffic. So I just wanted to show you guys that some of that stuff is there.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Sarah,
Okay.
the lighting thing was in there too, saying that your lighting should not be penetrating others' spaces or whatever. There was one of those provisions that.
Correct. Right. This is not talking about, so this is in the parking section.
Right.
It's
But
not
I'm just
talking
saying,
about,
at least it's in there for the both.
That's right, for a parking area,
Yeah.
right? In a cottage, if they have this kind of a design or this kind of a design, and they want to put some lighting here, and there's a residential property over here, whatever they're doing to light the parking lot has to meet those standards.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sarah, is, have we thought about any restriction on what type of vehicle can be parked in these off-street parking?
No, it's on our work plan, Guy, to go back and modernize our parking section.
But what I'm thinking of right now is, RVs and stuff.
Oh, no RVs. There can be no RVs in these parking spaces.
Well, that's what I'm bringing up. I'm wondering if we could add something to the parking, that this parking is somehow restricted to personal vehicles. I don't
Yeah.
know how you would define what the definitions are, but just to get at, Lynn, as you said, no RVs, no boats,
Yep.
things like that. I don't know if we can do that in this language for cottage clusters. I mean, it's not.
That's a really good point, Guy, because there's just not going to be enough room at any of these lot sizes for RVs and boats, unless it's a canoe. I mean, maybe you could put a canoe in your living room or hang it on the side of your house like we used to.
Sprint van, people use sprint vans as personal vehicles, and you probably have to allow those, but there's gotta be some definition of.
Yeah,
something.
yeah.
Anyways, it's a thought.
That's a great question, and I will ask. And it might be because if you were, let's see, I might be getting some of my conversations confused with communities. But like in a cottage cluster or in a townhome, if they wanted to plat the individual units for individual home ownership, and to where the child lots are owned and then the ground stays part of the parent lot, so you have CC&Rs for maintenance agreements and different things. That might be another area where we can look for that too.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that the one thing you usually have to be able to allow is a wheelchair accessible van.
Yep.
So for handicapped children or adults, and that would be in the ADA kind of place anyway. But that's that's a clear exception we would want to make.
Yep. Okay. So architects do not like that word, I have found out, mezzanine. For design standards, so we're going to talk about that in a minute. But okay, so entries. Driveways shall meet Tillamook County driveway standards. So those are largely through Tillamook County Public Works with the road approach. And as you guys recall, Nescoin does also have some driveway standards baked into your codes already. There's the provision, that in lieu of what the Nescoin driveway standards require, if there's a different width required by Tillamook County Public Works, that's okay. So, largely, in my opinion, for a cottage cluster or something, I think Public Works is the appropriate authority to make sure that their driveway connection is of adequate width and in the correct location of the lot in terms of for access and transportation compliance. So does anybody disagree with that? I actually just like the way that's written, so I'm gonna have to clean it up and say Tillamook County Public Works, but any concerns about that? And then, so to Lori's point and the points made earlier, now we start talking about the entryway of a cottage cluster.
And we go down to I think what we talked about last time, at least one entrance to the porch, outdoor space shall face the street. So if I were building one of the street facing cottages, I would just have a continuous porch that starts in the front and goes around to the side to face the common area. That kind of deals with Rand's issue that because I still think it's important that there be yeah, there are places in Nescoin today that kind of have porches on the side or place, and a lot of porches on the second story, because especially people close to the water, I mean, that's a smart thing, they'll have washaway places on the first floor, and then they have their decks on the second floor facing the street. But I'd like to, I think we talked about this last time, and I still think we gotta keep it.
Okay. All right, any other comments on this section?
No, looks good.
Okay, outdoor open areas. So this is the open space, and so we have agreed to apply the 150 square feet per cottage and not reduce that, correct? I think, Lynn, you were one, we did the math on that a couple of meetings ago. Just want to make sure.
Yeah.
What do you guys feel about that second bullet? I don't know if I can keep that in. I think we have to stay with the basic 150 square feet of floor area, or excuse me, 150 square feet of open area. Because if we're introducing 750 square feet.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one. Here's what I think is going to happen with that one. So the developer is going to, in some places, there'll be no issue because there's enough vacant land to make people are just going to be okay, fine. In some areas, the developer's going to say, okay, well, I just can't do that and get all these other things done in a way that I think works well and blah, blah, blah. And then they just have to get an exception. Isn't that how the process goes?
It would be, yeah, they could, but I'm trying to avoid exceptions because then exceptions become discretionary.
Yes. And so I think the thing we just want to be sensitive to is that we're not architects, builders, or developers. And I just know there will be some issues that come out of what, and we may hear them on the 5th or on the 29th. But I think the goal, if the goal of middle housing is to get middle housing, and the history in Oregon is it's one of the hardest states to get things because things are overspecified. So I'm not proposing we change it. I'm just saying we need to be prepared for some pushback and to answer that. And maybe it'll never happen. Maybe it'll work out that well. I just once you start developing these properties and you get all the other requirements in place, I just expect there to be some people saying, could we compromise on this because we'll get a better product? But
right.
we'll see.
That's one of the questions to the community. Should we have some allowances to not apply 150 square feet per unit and add some flexibility to that?
I think we should see if they raise it.
Okay.
I think we should. I think it's really important, given that people haven't been in the weeds on this that we have, that we see what they see as difficult, as opposed to saying, yes, I mean, let them come forward with it.
Aren't we talking about 7,500 square feet?
So on the 7,500, so it depends on guy what the minimum lot size requirement is. So in the Nesco and RR zone, it's 20,000 square feet. So this would apply. This qualifier for 4 and up to 8 outright also applies on that 20,000 square foot lot.
What I'm talking about is the language here is 750 square feet. There's no lot size that are 750 square feet. That's 7,500. I think we're missing a zero in both.
Yes, we are. Thank you.
Okay.
Right. Right. But I think I gotta. Yeah. Where I thought we landed was just 150 square feet per unit. Okay, Lynn's shaking her head yes. Okay,
Oh, can I just ask a question? If we're talking about 150 per unit and the minimum size or the maximum size is 900 square feet, is that right?
Mhm.
So we're talking, so if you just think that that's probably about 30 by 30. We're talking about a piece of land that's 5 feet the length of the house. That seems to me like we want to have at least 5 feet for people to walk out their back door and let the dog out or to put a chair out to have a cup of coffee. It seems
Yeah.
like that would be a minimum per unit.
The 150.
Yes.
Yeah. And there's language in here, so I think it's the next slide. Let me see. Yeah, it is. Okay. So to your point about also like making sure that there's a decent width of that open space by each unit, that's coming up too. One of the most, one of the important things too is the courtyard must be a single contiguous piece. And cottages must abut the common courtyard on at least 2 sides of the courtyard. So let me go back up here.
Yeah. So we got, yeah. Yeah.
Anything else on that slide?
Okay.
Questions, comments? Okay. All right. Outdoor open areas. So Lori, I don't know if you can see this. So at least one portion of the required open area shall be shaped so a 12-foot by 12-foot square can fit inside of it and be accessible to all units. Required open space shall not be counted in the required setback areas. So you don't get to double dip. Required outdoor open area may be shared by 2 or more dwellings or be provided through a private outdoor space such as a deck or patio. I think this 4th bullet is really important. It shall be developed with a mix of landscaping, ground cover, lawn, pedestrian ways, and or paved courtyard area, and may also include recreational amenities. So the way the code reads is that impervious elements of the outdoor open area shall not exceed 75% of the total open area. So if 1,200 square feet is required for open area, what is that, 900 square feet? They couldn't have more than 900 square feet covered with impervious surface. That makes sense to everybody?
So that's an impervious surface that's not a parking area.
That is correct. This would be the courtyard only.
Okay.
Or the outdoor open space.
So does that include the walkways and sidewalks and things?
A question, Randall, and that's what I'm asking for clarification on.
Okay.
So here's a question.
Mhm.
if the open space, the courtyard area, part of what I think that sounds very much, not that courtyards are great, but it kind of sounds like an urban area, right? Where everywhere around you there's houses and stuffs, and there isn't, there isn't any, there's obviously no yards for these houses. And I guess the question I have is, if someone came in and said, okay, we'd like to reduce the amount of open space because we have beach around us, we have walking trails around us, we have bicycle friendly roads, blah blah blah. What would be the county's reaction to that?
Anecdotally, I could agree with that and get behind that. But from a regulation application standpoint, I don't know how to quantify that or how they then justify reducing the open space
Right.
to, yeah, and then what's an acceptable. And I think it's a point well made, but I think that that's what enhances community health and recreation and livability, is to say, in addition to this area, there's these incredible outdoor resource opportunities for people.
I guess what I'm wondering is if instead the builder said, okay, we got 4 houses here, I want to give everyone a little plot of land to go with their house that they can garden, they can put yard furniture in, they can do whatever they want with it, but I'm going to give them mini yards instead of a courtyard. What is that doable, or is that just no? Because courtyards are going to look like affordable housing if they're in the village. I mean, it isn't something that people have decks and patios, but they don't have little courtyards between their houses necessarily. And again, I'm not opposed to them. I'm thinking about the application and how people will do it and what people want.
Mhm.
But probably easiest just to let it be and see if the community cares or not. It's not a big issue for me, but I'm just curious because
I think if the developer, so like Crowd Ground or someone comes in and they say, we're gonna do a cottage cluster. I think the courtyard has to stay as part of that common area, but they could create the child lots for each cottage and give them land area with that is their own, which is why for cottage clusters, you can't have lot coverage maximums. You know, that because the idea is that they're going to plat out that cottage potentially for individual ownership.
Okay, thank you.
I have another question trying to understand this. So in the cottage cluster, we have a setback all the way around. And is that 5 feet?
And I believe we can go 10 feet all the way around.
So which do we have in our plan? Are we saying 5 or are we saying 10?
20 in the front, 20 in the rear, and 5 on each sides.
Okay. And then are those are not considered part of the open space? Is that right?
Correct.
So would those, if you were to parcel them out, they would be like a backyard for a piece of a house that got their, in a practical sense, would people use them as their backyard, but they're just not considered open space?
They could.
Okay.
I think it depends on, like, if someone came in and wanted to do a cottage cluster and they knew that they wanted to plat the cottages for individual ownership, that would all factor into orientation and design so that where they had an opportunity, they could give each cottage a little yard too.
Okay. And then this 12 by 12 square that we have, that is not part of the setback.
Correct.
So that would be between the buildings.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thanks.
common area and the setbacks are 2 different things. So you can't use your setbacks to justify your common courtyard area. Okay, and good questions. And then, so there's a landscaping provision in here. And then, something where pedestrian traffic is located. Tom and I talked about this. We put this in, just thinking that this would be something that would be desirable to the community to look at, especially Nescoin has all of these amazing artists and people, very creative people in the community. But I may need to soften this language just a bit so it doesn't look like it's becoming a barrier. Lynn, you're on mute.
Concrete's a barrier. Concrete is really expensive. So I actually think we shouldn't say concrete. We should say, I mean, whatever the euphemism is for hard surfaces or whatever we want to say. But I agree. I think we have to be careful that decorative pavers, aren't expensive if you do the work yourself. But I didn't know till we built our garage the difference between concrete and asphalt or whatever the alternative is, and it's significant.
It is, yeah. Okay. Okay. So here is some more language. These are a bit redundant. Bullets 1 and 2. So here is, okay, so this is actually what I have been writing in for other cottage clusters. So here's the language that I've pulled in. So it has 150 square feet. It's a minimum of 15 feet wide at its narrowest dimension. And it includes a mix of landscaping, ground cover, lawn, pedestrian ways. Now what this one does allow for is that, so Lori, one of your questions, pedestrian ways that are contiguous to a courtyard can count towards the courtyard's minimum dimension and area. So how do you guys feel about that language versus the language before where those pedestrian ways would not be counted?
Well, if there's sidewalks or something, they're kind of a border on a courtyard. If they're just graveled pathways, they're a little less separated, although they would still not be a play area. But
So yes, in looking at the last two bullets. So your pedestrian way, if it's contiguous, could count for the courtyard. And here's the other clarifier, your parking areas, required setbacks and driveways do not qualify.
right.
Yeah, and that's an interesting one because again, it doesn't give the designer flexibility. It's kind of like, the question I always have is, in a design contest, could a really good designer say, let me take those driveways and make those all part of our courtyard, and that means we have more green space, or I don't know. I mean, I just don't know. Not skilled enough to know what it would do to give the designer more flexibility to enhance livability and quality of life. And it's the one you always think of is the projects in New York or the old projects in North Portland that have been torn down, where there was absolutely it was a cement building, 8 stories high, and on some gravel there was a swing set. And that was it. There was like nowhere you could plant a garden. There was it screamed affordable housing. And didn't look like anyone else's house in the neighborhood. So I don't want to change it. It'll be interesting to see what people say. And I know that if someone came forward with a great cottage cluster and they had been innovative, I would want the county to be positioned to consider it.
Mhm. I like that the pedestrian ways in this option can count if they're contiguous, because I think that does also
Yep.
promote walking and, you know, other opportunities that don't have to be covered by impervious surface, and that is a 75% maximum of coverage by impervious surface. So, but if you are going to pave something or have pavers, you might want to see them be more of the pedestrian ways than the actual courtyard itself.
Right.
One thing I've thought about is it's really easy to think about lots from above in a grid pattern. And that's the way all of our sketches are to illustrate possibilities. And some of the most interesting projects aren't in a grid. They are truly clustered, or they're zigzag or staggered or something. And I've also been thinking about Lynn's article from The Atlantic about how all of these rules make things more expensive and perhaps not more livable, and definitely not perhaps affordable for middle housing, some of the more restrictions that we get. And so I guess for myself, I've been challenging myself to think, like, in an ideal world, I'd like this, but if we're thinking about middle housing, and in reality, Nesquin was never, or a lot of those houses, they're not fancy houses, but they're really livable, you know? And so, like, we want to make sure we have high enough standards that it fits with the village, and they're places that people want to live and make a home for, and not just transition through quickly because they're cheap. But on the other hand, we want them to, developers, to be able to think about how they can make them for a price point that people can afford.
Yeah.
So it's a tricky line, and I think it's going to be a tricky line to
Yep.
challenge the public to think about, you know, to really think about who do they want to be buying here in the village? Do they want the people that are working and doing, you know, that are working in the neighborhood, or do they want, you know, who is it that they picture as their neighbor?
Well, I think that Kingfisher Apartments is a great example of a community being really concerned about a stale building and, you know, something coming in that wasn't going to be of quality. And, you know, they have landscaping, it had some design, you know, all of these pieces folded into a very thoughtful design. And I think that I feel like, based on, you know, who I interact with, and as long as I've been doing this, you know, there's a sense of pride and craftsmanship that'll come with some of this for the people that want to come in and do this work. And I think we're going to see that.
Yeah, I think we have our fingers crossed who the architect is that the developer works with. That they visit the site and walk through the village and go, okay, I see what would work here, as opposed to just someone, I'm gonna slam down some townhouses here and get out of here, which is mostly what you see in Portland. So there are exceptions, but we want these to be exceptional.
Agreed.
So, you know, thinking of what, through this discussion, you know, you kind of wish that we had somebody in our committee who actually was a developer or architect, or, you know, somebody design person or whatever. Because we just can't, you know, like we've said, none of us are experts in putting these things together, and we're trying to put the rules in place by which somebody will have to operate.
Mhm.
How about, I mean, if somebody, as to Lynn's point, if somebody came up with a really good option that we hadn't thought about, would they go for, could they go for I'm trying to think of the variance criteria. Could they get a variance?
It could be hard though, Guy, because then you're talking about issues that are self-created. There's no reasonable alternatives. I think there's a lot of flexibility in the planning commission to look at those things. But, then you get into an appeal, you get in a jeopardy of an appeal situation. But the good news is I have several architects on other committee working groups.
Okay,
And which has been great because, we're all doing, the same work in each community. And I have not had an architect yet or a developer express concerns that these standards could be too restrictive and stifle creativity and innovativeness. I think like where I'm seeing communities really wanting to hold the line is that single story, 900 square feet.
yeah,
That seems to be what matters most. And then it's create pathways, create gardens, do all this other stuff. That sounds great. Just don't make the buildings too tall and too big. Do you agree, Randall?
Yeah.
It's like,
Hi, Tom.
Hello.
Welcome.
Sorry, I'm late. I have deadlines and other activities that I couldn't break away from. Sorry.
That's okay. We're making progress.
Obviously so. You're already on slide 12.
I've been taking notes. So,
To be prepared.
yeah. Okay. So pedestrian ways. So pedestrian ways connect to the entrance of each of them, to the main entrance. Pedestrian way standards are for common courtyards and shared parking. Now, one of the things that the consultant said to me was, are we sure we wanted 3 feet wide? I think we can go to 4 feet wide for pedestrian ways. How do you feel about that? You're on mute, Lynn.
The deal with 4 foot, I just learned this when I built my garage. The reason they're recommending 4 feet now is because it's more helpful for ADA and for people who have walkers, wheelchairs, or other rolling help tools. And so again, I think it's I'm torn because again, also for ADA, you want cement. You don't want pavers, you don't want rocks, you want cement. So to me, I'm fine with 3 feet wide, but I also think if there's an ADA unit on the property, then we gotta, maybe theirs has to be 4 feet wide, but I'm hesitant to add things. This goes to the Atlantic thing about don't just, if you got to build affordable housing, the first word is affordable. And everything you add at every increment adds to the cost and et cetera. So I'm open to it, but I get why they say 4 because 4 is the better opportunity for people with walking issues.
And this does say minimum, a
Right.
minimum.
Right. Yeah, I think if you have the minimum in there, people can make it 4 foot or 3.5 or something without saying that it's going to be a minimum of 4 foot, which I think that's pretty wide.
Mhm.
For certain functions, it's good, but will dictate a higher cost, especially running around this whole complex.
Mhm. Rory, what are you thinking? You thinking?
Me?
Yeah, you got something to share?
No, I was just looking out my window because I'm right now I'm in Portland. I was looking at my city sidewalk and I don't think it's 4 feet. I think it's probably a little bit more than 3 feet, but I see a lot of people go through there with all sorts of different devices, including walkers, because there's a nursing home not very far from me. So it seems like a minimum of 3, and if they have an ADA unit on the property, they would hopefully provide access to that that was bigger, you know? Um, so I guess my mind's going back to that. We need to give them flexibility to do what makes sense for the piece of property.
Okay. Okay, so here is some language about solid waste facilities. Screening. My question is, so this is something, and I will have this by next Saturday. Can we apply this to 3 and 4 units as well? Now, if we go back to what we already have. Well, excuse me, that is for non-residential. Okay, never mind. I need to pull that away. Okay. So. Any questions, comments, or concerns about solid waste? I like this. I personally think this is important.
Yeah, and especially, it's just maybe a trivial barrier, but at least one more barrier to bears.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same.
Well, and I think it was a comment that had been made by this group that we were talking about was also making sure that where they are screened, that the local garbage company can still get to the solid waste facility.
So Sarah, do you know, or the planners know, one of the things, again, when you think about the scale and the look, these cottage clusters do not have to have common garbage and recycling facilities, do they?
I don't believe so.
And it would be more community friendly if they did.
I think so.
That, and maybe, you build in where they store their bins in the garage area so that they're not visible around the house. But I don't think we're talking about a dumpster for a cottage cluster.
Or maybe if there is that shared community area with a dumpster, I mean, that's where that franchise conversation comes back in. Because wherever it is, wherever it's kept and being screened, it has to be accessible by the garbage service.
Right.
No,
But I also think it's not optimal. I'm just trying to think about this. Dumpsters have all kinds of challenges. They're dangerous for children would be one of the first. And they're often locked up. And in fact, they often these days have to be locked up. And so then you get a cyclone fence around a big metal thing. And so I guess I'm just throwing it out for consideration. I think people should have garbage cans and then there's the bear issue, right? It's easier to have a bear friendly garbage repository if it's not one person having to carry the full cost. They're expensive. So I just don't know, but it's hard for me to envision 4 cottages of 900 square feet with a dumpster on their lot.
Well, not all dumpsters are large. There's a dumpster with a short-term rental unit across the street from me, and they have put a fence around it, and it does look much better. It's kind of a mini dumpster, but and they were notoriously famous for feeding the local bears before they had this, and that seems to have fixed it.
Hmm.
Hmm,
So when going back to this diagram of the 4 units,
yep,
with the entryway, and there would be a common area screened in for the garbage trucks to get to, whether it was a dumpster or everybody
okay,
things were in there.
okay. Well, that makes sense. I just, yeah,
And by the way, cyclone fences are explicitly prohibited.
Yep, you can't use a cyclone fence for
oh,
screening.
good.
Yeah. So a hedge, so vegetation or a solid wood fence. Okay. So then the next slide talks about, well, what about a property with a home on it already? And somebody wants to create a cottage cluster. So the single family dwelling should be part of the cottage. If the dwelling is greater than 900 square feet, that's okay. But it does count towards the maximum number of cottages in a cluster.
Yeah. And do we have the answer to the question posed in the little box?
So does this apply to triplexes and fourplexes? So this is a great question. And that goes back to your community choices. If you want to talk to the community about whether or not triplexes and fourplexes must be attached. Because this question is answered by whether or not 3 and 4 units must be attached common wall construction. And where I thought we had landed was that 3 and 4 units must be attached. So if we stay on that course, then I would say the house, you'd probably have to partition the house.
Huh.
Does that make sense? Because unless you're gonna, you know, create the firewalls and stuff within the existing home to either add on or convert it, which could be possible. But then you still would have to meet the design standards, including the minimum lot size. That makes sense to everybody.
Well, I had envisioned these cottage clusters to be an option, obviously. Hoping not to see too many triplexes and fourplexes attached as very large buildings that are different than most of what exists there in Nesquin. So,
So this language, Randall, for existing structures does apply to cottage clusters, and the dwelling can be factored in as a cottage. So the existing dwelling will count towards the number of cottages, but there's no penalty if the dwelling is bigger than the size of the cottages. Right, the
Okay.
two cottages have to still conform with everything we said, but if there's an existing dwelling on a property, as long as, again, you meet all the other standards for parking, setbacks, lot size,
right,
etc. It's just if we're talking about triplexes and fourplexes, I don't think you could build one of those and keep the single family dwelling as a freestanding dwelling on the same lot.
okay. I think that clarified it. I was getting a little mixed up there.
It's a lot. We're going through these fast, aren't we, Tom?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So, other things, community input. do we want to allow larger cottages in the NESCO and RR zone versus the NESCO and R1 and R3 zones?
Yeah, I think that this was regarding places, the RR zones are basically to the east and maybe peripheral in any neighborhoods. And we thought that that was a reasonable option, given it might be on a slope and such, and a two-story might make more sense in that context.
I think you did a nice job on this slide.
Thank you.
So I guess I just asked, does anyone?
So we are allowing for larger cottages on our zone. I mean, that was our thing.
Yes.
Guy, and that might be a community choice thing to talk about with everyone.
And go back to, again, to the point that developers not going to want to develop something that really stands out, except in a couple of places in the village. If they had any sensibility. I mean, the places east of 101 are very different than either South Beach or the Old Village or Sahali, which of course they got their own standards. So we're really talking about Viking Estates and Hills and Escalon, and of course they got their own standards too, the Hills and Escalon.
Right.
Hawk Creek Hills, I mean, like, very different housing up there, but so this would pertain to a lot of the empty, the undeveloped land east of 101. And I liked what we did with, to Rand's point, allow larger square foot and height. Yeah.
So that's built in here.
Right.
I have a question.
Yes, Lori, go ahead.
I have a question about the line that says cottages within 20 feet of the street property line may have their entrances facing the street. I can't remember the exact language in the previous slide that talked about.
It was 50, I think was what it said.
I just want to make sure that they're saying the same thing.
Yeah.
So this is 10 feet. I'm gonna put this all in like a concise document for you guys to read next, and I should be able to kick that out pretty soon. Actually, Tom, I've got that almost all done.
Okay, so on this one, it says at least one entrance to the porch or outdoor space shall face the street. And then the one that we just read, it said it may, not it shall.
It's a good catch.
Yeah. And I think, so let's talk about this. What does the community think? Do you like the flexibility, or do you want as many of them as possible to have an entrance that faces the street?
I think in the RR zones, I mean, there's only 2 streets in the village that are RR. It's mostly talking about the areas east of 101. So it's different kind of community. They're not, I mean, the reason why we wanted street facing entryways, porches, whatever, is because of the sense of community, people walking on the street. You don't get much of that east of 101. And you won't, given the topography and everything else.
But this still talks about R1 and R3. It's all of these, so, I,
Hard for me to read this colored.
Right now,
Yeah,
so
hard for
in
God to
this
be
slide, it's permissive. It's saying cottages within 20 feet of a street property line may have their entrances face the street.
and I think Guy's comment was either it should have a porch facing the street,
Yeah,
or it wouldn't have to necessarily be the entrance, but
Some sort of entrance.
some way that it's facing the street to say, hi, I live here and we come out here and you can see us being a part of the community.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Uh, so that this should probably say shall have an entrance or a patio facing the street or something like that.
Well,
and
patio would have an entrance, wouldn't
entry. The other one talks about entry.
Yeah.
Okay, Tom, we can work on that and I'll give you some language. I got something, because I think I understand the intent.
Yes, I just want to make sure that it's clear that we're not contradicting ourselves or we're not, yeah, that we're saying the same thing in both places.
Yeah. Well, in all of these slides, I'm condensing them down to one document on cottage clusters.
So
Try
people can
the complexes.
view it. Yeah.
So yes, Lori, I agree, 100%. Okay. Okay. So here's another one of those community conversations is about community buildings.
it? And I just recall why I put those in green. Those are meant to be things we haven't really discussed before that had been there all along. We just hadn't talked about them yet.
Right.
And sorry for the green guy. I forgot.
Yeah. No, it's all good. We actually talked about that
Earlier.
early on, Tom, because I knew. So yeah, we're gonna come back, but I appreciate knowing where we left off. It is helpful. So in a cottage cluster project, in addition to the cottages and the open space, we could allow someone to have an accessory use. The comments across communities has been very interesting. So some communities are like, we got a lot of community meeting spaces. We want folks to be a part of our community. So we want them to meet us at existing community buildings. We want to foster community, build relationships. So we want them to join us in the areas that are already there. We have plenty of community meeting buildings, etc. Other communities are saying, that would be really cool to have something like a community meeting room or an exercise building or some sort of amenity for, health and well-being. Also having a community eating area, especially if it's a cottage community where you have aging in place or some sort of communal living, going back to gardens or different things. The one that's gotten everybody a bit concerned has been something like a daycare, in case like there's no way to say only the people, the cottage development can use the daycare. So there's been concerns about extra parking and traffic if there was a community building that could host those types of activities. With that, if you jump down towards the bottom, for that type of a structure building footprint, it is limited to 900 square feet. So I don't know how much of a party or how many kids you can have running around in 900 square feet. But that's been the conversation summarized countywide.
So I don't think, I mean, so I talked about this before. Adding a
Right.
community building in the village in the midst of a 4 cottage cluster seems to me going to ensure these people are never brought into the community. Because first of all, the neighbors are not going to be excited. There's enough friction already just in terms of if I have my stereo going on my deck and someone's literally 5 feet away. I mean, the cottage is tight, the village is tight already. And so putting a community building in there, just, I don't know. And also on the village side of the equation, there's lots of community buildings. There's the golf course, there's the parking lot, there's there's places to go, people to see, things to do. On the other side of the highway, I don't know. I don't know what the neighbors there would feel about a community building going up. I also think it really concerns me in terms of the cost of a cottage cluster, because it's just another thing we add, which we hypothesize might be a nice thing, but it's going to cost more for affordable
But
housing.
it's not a requirement. It's just an option.
Right, but I just can't see people wanting. I can see people wanting it for other people. I can't see them wanting it next to their cottage, an existing cottage, an existing house in Nesco Inn, which then begins to have whether it's a gym, whether it's an exercise room, whether it's a daycare, whether it's a party space. It's another public building in the middle of a residential area. And I don't think people, I mean, if it were Portland, with the density that we have in Portland, we have a community building near our house in Portland that is the Selwood Community Center, and it's about 800 square feet. And it's wonderful. It's on a commercial street. It serves probably, I would guess, 50 to 100,000 people. Weddings are there, retirement parties are there, community meetings are there. There isn't any other place for all of us to go unless we get in a car. And it makes sense to me. But this seems to me, in a community of 400 people, social engineering that is overkill and may prevent people being blended into the community as well as they could be. So I don't know. It's not one of those things that will affect my enjoyment of Nesco Inn, because I have a big lot that I bought 45 years ago. When you could afford to do such things. But I do know that when people come to the beach and they want to just be at the beach in their small cottage that their parents handed down to them, this seems a little bit much. Maybe not. Maybe everyone will love it on April 5th. But I see lots of potential downside risk for the community and for the people who move into these units. And hopefully, I mean, the other possibility is all the cottage clusters sell to wealthy people right off the bat because of the price of coastal property. I mean, we haven't even discussed that, but that's possible. And so anyway, that's 2 cents worth for what it's worth.
To me, what argues for it, and I'm not arguing for it, but yeah, the point is that if you have a 900 square foot house, trying to sell that as a living space, primary living space, would be easier if you had some overflow area that if you needed to have it. So, that's the thing I think of when I think of that. guest housing, 900 square feet. If you've already got a family, you're probably not going to be able to put up another person. So that's sort of auxiliary use as a selling point.
Well, there was a 900 square foot, actually a little less, cottage in the village that sold for $800,000, Tom.
Yep.
So these places, and that's the ideal size actually for people who are looking just for a cottage, you know, that not a second home, but it's a vacation place to go to. I'm against this whole idea primarily because the whole thing about cottage clusters is to increase housing, not to facilitate other activities, daycare, whatever. Yeah, that those things add to a broader community, but the whole purpose cottage clusters is to get as much housing in as we can on the lot size that we have. So why are we even considering this? It makes no sense to me.
Probably,
Well,
I think, Guy, if it was a larger cottage cluster, you know, if you're talking about several cottages beyond the 8, you know, because I mean, these in some areas could get pretty big.
But we're not in Neskowin, it's limited to 8. So
Well-
I think for us, it doesn't, I agree that if you had a 16 cottage place, you know, and there are some places in Portland that I've seen kind of represent, yeah, you could have some various community places, whether it be for storage or, you know, whatever. But no, up to 8 for us, no. I mean, just let's use the space. And it's valuable space.
Yeah.
Every square foot of land in the areas now west of 101 is very high cost areas. You don't want to have, you know, community centers on this. So no, for me, no, take it all out.
Okay, well, my only pitch here is I do not see any community spaces besides the Nesquim Beach Golf Course, which is their merchandise and bar.
Well, Rand,
You can fit 20 people in there.
if I built a 6 cottage place down off of whatever street, and I had one of those cottages as a community building that sits in the back. Are you gonna see that as your community center? No,
No.
it's gonna be rooms for those other 5 cottages. So it's not, doesn't help us form community for Neskowin. It helps us little clustered group have a place to go. I get Tom's point, you know, yeah, that's a selling point. If I got a cottage and then I can also have access to this programming space or something, but it's not for the community. So
I agree.
Is this
Not-
something that's part of the SB 406, or is this a recommendation by the
This is
consultants?
This is all extracted from the model plan. So this is not stuff I invented.
Yeah, no, this is.
Blame it on Tom.
So we have prescriptive language, but this is a choice. So this is one of the reasons why we're talking about it, is because, like I said, there's different opinions in different communities. Meatards thinks it's great. Let them have a building, put in an exercise room. They love the idea. Pacific City says they've got plenty of community buildings, you know?
Yeah, they do.
and that's going, and the great thing,
Huh?
we're all different kinds of communities. We all have different senses of community. And I think, you know, our sense is if we have a community, and one of the recommendations we have in our community plan is to move the damn fire hall out of harm's way and use that facility as a community center. Now, it's not that people can't walk to it. That's the downside of it, but it's at least something.
Yeah.
I walked to it.
Yeah, we need a community center. I agree. We'll get the old boom boom room. We'll take over those other places and create something over there. Yeah.
That's
I would say with this, I think what is prescriptive is to allow them to have like a centralized building. I think it's 400 square feet or 600 square feet, but it could be to stow, to like store mowing equipment. Or if they needed some little manager's office or something. So baked in, there is that allowance for some sort of accessory building. But this is a different animal. So this is an intentional, would you want these things? The communities that are interested in them, what I've also said is, I can't guarantee that these spaces would be used only for the people that live in the cottage project. Right? So again, talking about traffic and parking and noise and all those things that could come with this. I can't, if there's an issue, I don't have the ability to regulate that. Like if we allow them, it's for everybody.
But I think the other thing is, and I think this is where we get stuck, is I view the community hall and the golf course and as community centers right now. There were large numbers of people gather on a somewhat predictable basis. And if you need one of them, they're available to you. So, and it's a really small community. So the thing I think is, what does it do to the people who are there to have a community building next door to them?
Mhm.
Is it required for those 4 cottage cluster or 8 cottage clusters?
No.
Is it
No.
required? No, I know it's not required, but it's also unnecessary for their enjoyment in the community as the community values itself.
Right.
So that's important too, how the community sees itself and wants to go into the future. And there's no reason to stand away from that. I mean, Nescoin should be very proud of how wonderful it still is after all these years.
Oh yeah, and all the community walks and the garden.
Yes.
The
So
4th of July stuff, yeah. Well, we put it in there because we had to have the conversation. This is one of the few areas where there's a choice. And I don't know if you want to bring it up just for full transparency on the 5th. To say this is an option, but here's the committee's recommendation, is that we have enough amenities, we want people to be part of the community, we're recommending.
yes, I think we should be transparent. I think it would be nice if the committee had a position that was coherent, and we can work on that further in this meeting. But I think we should get people's feedback on it.
Well, Lynn, we're not obligated to put dumb ideas out.
Okay.
So I think people ask us, for reasons to take this out. So, sorry about the.
But it's somewhat disingenuous to take a model program and then boil it down for us and not have an option. And I'm not strongly for this. I can see how it might be useful, but I don't have a dog in this hunt, as they say.
Yeah.
But I think we need to, say, this is something we recommend, we don't recommend. This is something other communities do. We don't think that fits here.
Right.
And then get argued into it if there is a big argument for it.
I'm comfortable with that. I'm comfortable saying this is something that we looked at, we talked about, we don't recommend it. Some communities are going to adopt it, but given our values and our community plan, we do not recommend this addition.
I think that's great. And I'll leave it out of what I send to you. But if after the 5th, everybody says, oh my gosh, we love this, we want this, you guys come back and say, Sarah, I guess we're gonna put it in, then I'll put it in. My sense is that overall community sentiment is going to share your opinion. But I think it's just the right thing to do to let them know this was one of the things that was discussed.
Yeah, I think
A
they-
lot
what
of
she
things
said.
we're not letting them know about. So this should be one of them. I'm not trying to cover the universe of what cottage cluster could be.
Right. So. Okay, so we are down.
So can we go back to the windows a minute?
Yes, I was just looking to see what the last slide was.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm gonna send you guys some basic. Well, actually, so we have the design standards that Tom put in the codes for cottages, orientation, entryways, open space. So here's something, and this is where I think your conversation with the community could get lively. This is what I'm working with right now in Oceanside as we all approach this point with our processes. Because we're all getting down to kind of the nitty-gritty and the last pieces. So does imposing, or I'll say establishing design standards for structures is optional. Establishing design standards for triplexes, fourplexes, townhomes is something that can be added into the codes without triggering a Measure 56 notice. Now, we're going to do the notice anyway, Lynn, to your point. Everybody's going to get notice when it's time to go to hearing. Whether it's required or not, I think it's the right thing to do. However, what insulates us from property takings issues, appeals, will be if we wanted to establish design standards, we would establish those to those middle housing types. What we can also do, as we've discussed, based on community conversations, and I've had very similar conversations in Oceanside in terms of the need or the desire, I'll say, strong desire to put some design parameters on single family dwellings as well. And so Oceanside has been walking down the path of taking the model ordinance design standards that can be established for 3 or more units and have folded those into the draft documents for single family dwellings and duplexes. And that includes building height calculation because they don't have what you have, and a few other things. And for those folks that have not been paying attention to our process in Oceanside, they are paying attention now, and it is not in a great way. And the community has upended over this. So when we talk about design standards, one of the things that would help tremendously is that conversation with the community, and this may be a good chunk of the conversation. Do you want design standards at all? Do you think design standards, and I'll send you some prescriptive design standards that are very easy, that are part of the model code that I can also work with here in the office. Should those design standards only apply to 3 or more units? Triplexes, fourplexes, townhomes. We'll have to look at that, Tom, for cottage clusters.
Yeah.
Do we want to have another amendment request in addition to that for single family dwellings and duplexes? The conversation has turned quite controversial because now that the community has seen those basic design standards on paper, I think that the shift of wanting those, at least for 1 and 2 family dwellings, is going to dramatically shift. Because now we're talking about property rights, and I don't really like those design standards. I want different ones. And that's not part of this project. What this has been is there's some basic design standards that we could make a run at in, establishing for everyone, or maybe not. But I will give those to you and walk everyone through them on the 29th so that you can pick up the conversation on the 5th.
Great.
Learning the valuable lessons that I too am learning through this process. I think that because we have an opportunity to do some larger community engagement and outreach before they see it on paper or when they see it on paper, that guidance would be very good. There's some nuances to Oceanside. Their CAC has already gone through a process. They actually want to reduce some of their building heights and do some things. And that is controversial. And that will be controversial if it moves forward. But I think that as we look at design standards, whether it's on this slide for cottages or for everything else as a whole, I'll send you guys that work. And then get feedback from the community of if they want it.
So, Sarah, just to make sure I understand. So, Oceanside does not have the design standards already on the books that we have.
They do not have a building height calculation methodology.
Okay.
It's average. There's been some construction of homes in the recent future that the community at large just hates. And they're like, we never want this to be able to happen again.
Okay. Okay.
So in this process, I am trying to also help them address some of those issues. Some of that has also resonated in our community conversations previously at the clubhouse in Nescoin. But I think this is where the rubber would meet the road in terms of, you know, we can propose design standards that we would apply to 3 and 4 units to single family dwellings and duplexes. I have to run that as a separate request.
Right.
And there can be some property takings and some concerns there.
Yes. Okay.
For me, what I'm trying to do is acknowledge everyone's comments about we hate the design. Our aesthetics, Sarah, look different than what you think, which I don't think anything because I don't regulate aesthetics. Just trying to find that common ground. And in Oceanside, it's brought us to a very contentious place.
Okay.
Take me a couple of weeks to walk back through with them. But I think it's worth, because of the feedback we've already heard in Nescoin about, we don't like some of the homes being built don't fit our village character. There may be an opportunity if there's community appetite to put in some design standards. I don't know, I can do it confidently for 3 units or more. 1 and 2 dwellings, it may not make it through, especially with that risk assessment for litigation and property takings. But if the community wants me to try, I will try.
Sarah, speaking of having to go through measure 56 anyways, and thinking that the whole purpose of this middle housing and why we're spending so much time on cottage clusters to increase the density of any lots that we have in Nescoin. Can we limit the outright and even conditional uses of cottage clusters to housing?
Say that one more time, Guy.
So let's say that, there's a lot of uses in an R1 and R3 zone that have nothing to do with single family housing.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody could be real creative in how they would use a cottage cluster to have some of those home industries, whatever, farm. I'm going to bring my horses into the common area. I'm going to be an outfitter that's going to have people come in here. I don't know, but I'm just thinking that there's a lot of uses that we have that don't serve what middle housing is about. And we have an opportunity here with a cottage cluster. I'm not suggesting any broader R1 or R3 thing, which I would love to see, but just for the cottage cluster, can we include something in the language to say that the only things he can be used for is housing?
You know what? Let me ask.
You know, Guy, that is a brilliant question.
Thank you, Lynn.
Yeah, it is, especially when you look at those larger areas on the east side of the highway, like the RR zone, where farm and forest uses are permitted outright, which we're not going to remove, but in terms of a cottage cluster, you know, putting that in, trying to see. Okay. There's also this piece. So all of this would apply as well. So Guy, that 100-foot resource zone setback is still there. And that's one thing the planning commission will have to talk about in terms of these are residential dwelling units.
Well, we have again, as I just saw the other day, an advertisement with an outfitter to go from Carlton to Neskowin and spend 2 or 3 nights in Neskowin on horseback. You know where the place is. So you can sign up now, and that's a farm use of that property on breakers.
They don't have a conditional use to do that, and they're still advertising.
They're advertising.
Okay, thank you. I will reach out to them. I didn't know that. I thought that they hadn't been.
Well, they're whatever the use, and I'm not sure whether they even have a short-term rental.
They cannot. No, I walked through all of that with them.
Yeah, I can send you the advertisement.
Thank you.
So
Of livestock. So already in Neskowin's RR zone. Livestock can be located closer than 100 feet to a non-farm residential building. So what this is basically saying is they can't be within 100 feet unless the livestock is a non-conforming use, meaning they've had livestock on the property before these codes were adopted. There's a farm deferral on the property.
well, I'm sure they're gonna,
As a conditional use. So I would say this would stop that from happening in a cottage cluster anyway.
but there are other uses. I actually wasn't thinking so much of the farm, but although it'd be comprehensive, just put the whole thing, but eliminate all other uses,
Yeah.
R1 and R3 in cottage clusters.
Mhm.
Eliminate other uses other than housing.
So Guy, I think that would really help shift the positive attitude towards cottage clusters.
Mhm.
That it's not going to become a small business, it's not going to become a daycare center, it's only housing. That's all you can have there.
Mhm.
And I think saying it overtly, this is, these are just for housing. That's it.
Mhm.
And I can't see that violates the law, because I think it's going to be hard to get people to do this for affordable
Well, I think
housing.
it does create a potential takings. But what made me think of it was when Sarah said, well, we're gonna have to go out with a measure 56 anyways.
I would say if we limit it, Guy, to cottage clusters, I'm
Yeah,
gonna ask the consultants if it just goes without saying that if it's a cottage cluster, the whole thing is dedicated to a residential use. You don't get to do other things in it.
even though it's in an R1 or R3 or R zone.
That's, yeah.
But I think making it explicit has
Yeah.
all kinds of merit,
Yep.
because no, you can't take the fourth house and turn it into the goal of this whole exercise and the expense of this whole exercise, which is now millions and millions of dollars,
Right.
is to get housing. And if instead we get property speculation that drives up the cost of small housing beyond any worker's capacity, we need to be ashamed of ourselves. And I don't mean us, I mean Oregon.
Mhm.
Because this whole thing is to get people into affordable housing. That's the whole point.
Yeah,
So being explicit, a cottage cluster, it's housing.
yeah.
Okay. Got it.
Not a hotel. It's not a little mini hotel.
Yeah.
So what I would recommend, because Tom, what I'd like to do in preparation for Saturday is I'd like to get that document done and just get it out to all of you. Because we don't have a meeting scheduled before Saturday, I would ask that you just keep your comments or send your comments and questions to me or any edits. And Tom, what we'll do after the meeting on Saturday is I will shift everything back to you for that.
That
Does
sounds
that-
good.
But
That
I'd
sounds
like
good.
you all to at least have an opportunity to read how I've put all of this together as best I can for now. This is the first run. It is going to change over and over and over again. But I'd like to give you something to where you can read it and see it on paper.
That'd be
Yeah.
great.
And by the way, I will be out of town for the next, including Saturday. I'll call in on Saturday. So may not editing anything till then. That's a good thing.
Okay. All right.
Okay, I think that was quite an exercise. Thank you, everyone. We have a public comment period here for Lynn and the other person left, I guess. Any comments, Lynn?
No, this has just really been educational and interesting. So thank you for all your hard work, everyone.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Okay, so the next meeting is this Saturday. We've gotten the, I think the explanation, it's somewhat self-explanatory in the title of the event. So I thank you all and I hope to see all of you at that meeting and maybe recruit people if you think of it, because it'll be a really good opportunity for them to get up to speed to then have more comments and input on the following Saturday. So trying to beat the bushes. Lori?
I was just gonna say, at the beginning of the meeting, before everyone had gathered, you had said, what's the best way to get the word out? And honestly, I think the best possible way is if everybody calls 6 people and tells them to call 6 people. I mean, the phone calls are so much more effective than the emails about getting people to understand the importance. And I don't, this next week is spring break, so there's going to be a lot of people around. And I would just say we all need to talk about the meeting as much as we can every time we see someone.
Yeah, so it's kind of 2 weeks. In fact, I'd package it and say, this next week you can get informed quite thoroughly through this presentation. And the following week, we'll be open to your comments and you'll know more about it. So your comments will be probably more on target if you come to both. So, all right.
Also, are there some places to put up some flyers like the golf course and those kiosks and maybe the store?
Nothing's open. I mean, there's something at the store. I guess we could have access to their bulletin board if anyone even looks at that. But so I'll whip up something to try and get people's attention. But I think the phone tree is still one of the best ways to do it. And who knows what they'll think the meeting is by the 50th phone call. They'll go, I heard there's a party at the
Yeah, we'll
That
start
would
calling.
be fun.
free
We'll all be calling the
merchandise
same
at the
person. Lori,
golf course.
you're doing well, Lori? You're
I'm doing great.
running yet?
What?
Are you
I
running?
walked? No, but I walked a mile and a half last night before dinner for fun.
Very
That's
good.
great.
All
Did you
right.
notice any difference? One leg working better than the other?
Definitely one is still impaired, but it's coming along.
Is it your knee or your hip?
I got a knee replacement 18 days ago.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well done, Lori.
I feel good about it. So
Good.
so you're not going to see me walking around the village with that stupid brace on anymore that I've been wearing for the last 5 years.
Keep icing. Keep
Okay.
icing.
Yeah.
All righty.
Okay. Well, great, everyone. Thanks again. And we'll see you Saturday. And I hope you get 3 phone calls encouraging you to come to the meeting.
Yeah.
All
Okay.
right. Thank
Minutes
you.
to follow, Ran. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I
Okay.